It is another beautiful week of Love What You Do again, and we are always thankful for everyone that's able to join us. And obviously, we're recording this for our group as well. And last week, we spoke about meaning and message, and got into a whole beautiful conversation about how we contemplate our meaning and message and how we decide those values, etc. And so it immediately came to mind that I needed to ask Peter to be here today as our special guest, and he kindly accepted. And he's going to talk about his perception on meaning and message and a whole bunch of other items today. So we're thankful. We always start these Q&As. They are absolutely free. We start them with 5 to 10 minutes of information about something that we feel is valuable to the community. And then we open it up for any question you want to offer up to the community, as well as to the I get to ultimately answer, but I'm sure Peter will have lots of ultimate conversations to add to that. So with that, I'm going to lean it on over to Mr. Peter Demarest, who I met at a Robert Hartman a happy hour. Some of you are familiar with the Robert Hartman profile, and Peter adds a whole amazing flavor to it. So we're going to get you started. It's all you today, Peter.
Okay, well, thank you. April, when you first invited me to be on this, I was frankly a little bit put off because I couldn't understand for the life of me why you thought I was a meanie person and that you wanted some sort of message about being mean. It just was kind of weird for me, but I guess we can go with that. I'm kind of against the concept altogether, frankly, but did something get lost in the message there? I'm not sure. What did I get the wrong meaning out of your message? Checking.
Let me now introduce you to the joyful Peter I've gotten to know that has his own wonderful sense of humor. And you never know what is going to come out of Peter. So I'm excited, Peter, for all of what you're going to share.
Okay, well, the great title, Love What You Do Again. I wake up every morning with, I get to do what I love again today. And that's kind of exciting. And it's all around the science of neuroaxiology and the power that it has to help people unleash more of their A game and achieve more of their dreams and be happier and less stress and healthier and whatever else that they want in your life. And I know some of you, Beth, you're in the program, right? Has it made a difference for you so far?
Taking some practice.
Okay, well, it does. Life is like that. It takes practice. So, and some of what will be covered, I'll be talking about here, is going to be somewhat familiar to you particularly, but some of it is also kind of an extension of what we teach in the self-leadership program. So that's me, founder of Axiogenics, and we won't go into the history. This isn't really about me. It's about the science and what the science makes possible. And this little tree diagram is part of what kind of explains that. Most of the world in the mainstream in coaching and training tends to focus on the symptoms of what we can see, what we can observe in the metaphor of the tree, the fruits of our labors, if you will, and other people's labors as well. Like, so what their behaviors are, their actions and their attitudes, all the outward stuff. And the reason why mainstream tends to do that is because they really don't have any choice. It hasn't existed until the science of axiology and neuroaxiology came along to actually get to the underlying roots of what drives the fruits of our labors, if you will. And so this little pithy thing, while mainstream coaching and training tries to fix the fruits, because it's really mostly about, oh, here's what's wrong with you. Here's where the KPIs aren't where they need to be. So we need to fix the problem. But it takes such a behavioral approach. They can talk about thinking, they can talk about values and tell you what you should do, but they don't really get down to the heart, to the root of why we do what we do. And that's what the science of neuroaxiology, generically also now called by lots of people just simply Axiogenics, because neuroaxiology is a lot to spell. And at the heart of it, it's more A game, more B game. And what that means is that we all have both. Would you all agree? We all have an A game and we all have a B game. The problem is that the B game, although it's not necessarily all bad, it is, it's kind of like checking off the boxes. We're just going through motions oftentimes, and it's only a few times out of the day that we take on really being able to bring our A game and thinking conscientiously, free of bias, free of the stress that diminishes our thinking capacities. Earlier today, I was actually over at Home Depot because we're doing a kitchen remodel, and I had to go visit our designer and place a final order for a couple of things. And a woman came in and walked right up to his desk saying, "How do I set up an appointment?" And she had a beautiful golden retriever dog, and he freaked because he's like 50 years old and scared to death of dogs. And it took him a full 15 minutes to recover to be able to get back to his computer after she left, right? And I just use that as an example of how little teeny tiny things can take us so off of our game from time to time, right? The dog was clearly well behaved. The dog also was wearing the vest that says it's an emotional support dog. So it was obviously going to be quite well behaved to someone like me who loves dogs. But unfortunately, Joe didn't like dogs and is scared to death of them. So it really took him off of his A game and took time to recover and all of that. So that's the work that we're really about. And when we say A game versus B game, what we're really talking about is our capacity to make choices and take actions that create greater value in our lives and in our world. So what has us not create maximum net value? Well, it turns out that there's something very simple. We call them gaps. Technically, we call them perception gaps. But perception gaps also lead to gaps in our understanding of meaning about things. Meaning also relates to our judgment of value, like what value those things have. That's part of how we make meaning. For those of you that have been in the program, you'll recall the storytelling, value, judging, meaning making machine, which is also known as a brain. And of course, we're constantly bringing in messages, verbal messages, but we see messages on signs. So we read stuff. We even all the things that our senses take in are, in a sense, messages coming our way of which we make meaning. But how many people are involved in a conversation in terms of what meaning and message is being existing between those two people? Oh, I just gave it away, didn't I? Two, right? Yeah, there's the meaning that we're putting into our message, that we think we're putting into our message, and then there is the meaning that people are taking from our message. And have any of you ever been in an argument with anybody, even though you were in, what do they call it, violent agreement? Right? We have a lawyer here, right? So you dealt with this all the time, where there was a gaps in what the meaning that was given to a phrase within a contract, or the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law, as an example, and what message is being delivered when we insist on a particular clause in a contract, or in a statement that we might make in certain situations that we then can get us into trouble or can lead to agreement. So gaps, as it turns out, are the cause of all of your stress, your upset. It's the cause of all your mistakes. Gaps are the cause of all conflict, all anger, all frustration, even war. is created as a result of gaps between meaning, message, and relative value of things. The ones that cause the most trouble are what we call unreconciled gaps. Unreconciled gaps are gaps that are not okay. They're like, it's not okay with me that this gap exists. So, for example, take Republican and Democrat. Well, to the far ends of both of those, it's not okay that the other extreme believes what they believe. It doesn't matter which direction we go. Come into the middle, there are certain things we're kind of okay with. All right, you believe that, we can agree to disagree. That's okay, no problem. My wife and I mentioned we're remodeling our kitchen. We had a lot of gaps that we had to reconcile to come to agreement as to what we were actually going to order and how things were going to lay out. We agreed early on that she was in charge of aesthetics and I was in charge of the practical functional stuff because I'm kind of the main cook of the family. I had no idea how many things that are functional are also interpreted as aesthetics and how many things of aesthetics are actually functional. And so it took a while, but we got there. So, so that also represents, because in those conversations, we actually created solutions that were better than either of us could have come up with on our own. And the lesson in that is that gaps are also opportunities. And we have a choice as to whether we see a gap as a threat or whether we see it as an opportunity. So it's these gaps, and two people can be looking at the exact same thing and believe it to be two different things, like this illustration here. How many people see the duck? Raise your hand. Who sees the duck first? Okay. And did you have to work a little bit to see the rabbit? Yeah. It's actually a ducket. It's neither. Let's see, there's a third option. On my little farm, no, we don't. So it's being able to reconcile these gaps that is really where the opportunity lives for us to have greater peace in the world, to make better decisions. How many decisions have you ever made that you then went back and said, if I only knew blank when I made that decision, I would have made a different decision, right? Because a gap can also be missing information, that is between our knowledge or perception and reality. Those of you that are in the self-leadership program and have taken the VQ profile, you know that there are a total of 36 different ways of thinking, and some of them are off to the left, overvalued, some are undervalued, and some of those contradict each other, right? There are some ways of thinking that are at odds with other ways of thinking that we think. And therein, again, lies both a threat and an opportunity. We can get stressed out over indecision because we don't know which one's right and which one's wrong. But if we do know which one's which, well, then we can discard the one that we know is likely to be inaccurate and tap into our best way of thinking to make better decisions, to see clearly, to judge things better and take more effective actions. So these gaps are really, if you can master the art of reconciling gaps that are unreconciled, it will completely change your life. It will solve every problem. Now, I don't know anybody that's completely mastered it, including myself. Just ask Pam, my wife. Because too often it is our biases that get in the way, what we call cognitive biases, our thought processes that are a little bit clear or over or undervalue certain things. For example, the need to be right. It's a big one. Nobody here has that, right? Does anybody want to be right about you have no need to be right? Just asking. Okay. Or if you want to be right about you don't, or you do, I mean, either way. A close cousin of need to be right is also the need to control. Was there one on that? I think, well, we'll get to it. In self-leadership, we talk about how the need to control is something that drives us very early on in life. Trying to, even crying to to be fed is a way that we try to control our environment so that we get fed. By screaming and get mommy to give us a bottle or a breast or whatever it is, or that we want there. And so we can, since it works, we think, oh, okay, I can control my environment, I can control other people, I can get them to do what we do. And that follows us into adulthood. But the interesting thing is that that need to control, like any other thing that we do often, becomes a habit. And once it becomes a habit, what's in control? Are you in control? Nope, your habits are in control. And you're powerless to do anything about it unless you choose to not be powerless, unless you choose to try to shift your perspective. If you're right-handed, you probably brush your teeth with your right hand, but you could choose to use your left hand if you wanted to. Be a little awkward at first, but eventually, if you did it enough, it would become just as comfortable as your right hand, if you did it enough. So, and we can, at any moment, we can choose a different pathway. We can choose a different neuro pathway, technically speaking, to think a little bit differently so that our biases and our need to be right and our need to control isn't actually controlling us. Because what's the only thing we actually have any control over whatsoever in this world? Debbie, what's that?
Ourselves and our thoughts.
Actually, you don't have a lot of control over your thoughts, but you do have control over your choices.
Okay.
See, I can influence your thoughts to the point where you don't actually have any control of them by saying something like pink elephant. And then your brain most likely is going to envision almost instantaneously a pink elephant because it does what it does, right? But you can choose to change the color of the elephant if you wanted to.
Good. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Good.
Just like you can, well, I was going to say something about the elephant in the room back to April there, but I'll skip it. Anyway, so the first shift that is most important to make is a shift into what we call a value-genic mindset. Value-genic meaning intention is to create greater net value. And this is at the heart of why we called our book what we call it, as Answering the Central Question, because the science taught us that value is the driving force of the human mind and spirit. It is what drives everything you do. In fact, let me ask you all this question. Can any of you give a single example of anything that you have ever done in your entire life that you consciously chose to do that you didn't somehow justify it or believe it was anything other than the best thing for you to do in that moment? Can you give me a single example, even the worst, most despicable, harmful, shameful thing you've ever done? In the moment you made that choice, was it not what you thought would be best for you? Think about it. Combined, we probably have, I don't know what, maybe 50 years total on Earth combined.
Thank you so much for that.
You're very welcome. Well, that's only because I wasn't really alive for a lot of my life. Not until Axiogenics came along. The point being that I've asked that question of literally thousands and thousands of people, and no one's ever been able to give me a single example of a time when we consciously did something that we thought was anything other than the best thing for us to do. The problem is that last little piece of it, the best for me. And that's what we call the self-centric mindset. When we're operating in a way that we only care or primarily care about what's in it for us, getting our way, being in control, being right, convincing somebody, and even some seemingly on the outside altruistic things like making a difference or helping somebody out or volunteering, all too often is for self-centric reasons. I need to feel good about myself. I need somebody to tell me that I'm a good person, or to assuage my guilt in some fashion or another. It doesn't mean the actions are all that bad, but if the motivation is self-centric, there's a risk involved that when we don't get rewarded for those things, when things don't work out the way that we wanted them to work out, we get upset and we might even blame others or resent others for not letting us make the difference that we wanted to make, or appreciating our efforts to be nice and to be kind and to be helpful and sympathetic. So there's also been some really interesting studies done. There was a gentleman some of you may have heard of by the name of David Rock. He's the head of something called Neuro Leadership Institute. They talk a lot about the parts of the brain, which I don't think is actually necessary, because I don't know about you, but I don't know how to control my posterior cingulate cortex thing intentionally, but I do know how to shift my thinking. So parts of the brain don't really matter that much, but understanding a little bit about how it functions is really helpful. And in that research, they did functional MRIs about what's it like when somebody is under a threat response. And they looked at how the brain was lit up and what parts were lit up and how much of it was lit up. And it turns out when we're under threat, very little of the brain is actually activated because the body is preparing you to do battle. It's taking blood and oxygen out of the brain into the muscles, shuts down the empathy centers, shuts down memory, and literally just prepares you to do battle on the battlefield. And the reason it shuts down things like empathy is because, well, if you're going into battle, empathy from a survival standpoint isn't very helpful. I mean, how would you feel about my shooting you with my bow and arrow? Not likely to garner the response that you're looking for in survival. But they also did the same studies. What happens when we're in a mindset that is more altruistic, or what we call valuegenic? And it turns out the brain lights up and we gain access to our empathy and our memory and our, well, dare I say, sense of humor and our ability for critical thinking and thoughtfulness, and empathy, of course. So just that shift creates a chemical change in the brain that is really amazing to see. And so the question becomes, how do we make such a shift consciously and intentionally? And it turns out it's as easy as asking ourselves a question, because questions are how we control our own brain to start with. If you think about when you woke up this morning, one of the very first things you did when you woke up was ask yourself a question. Does anybody remember what your question was?
Can I sleep any longer?
Can I sleep any longer? Yeah. Anybody else? Stephen, what was your question?
Did I have to get up?
Do I have to get up? Okay. Could have been, where's my phone? At my age, it's like, will I make it to the bathroom in time? So we use questions to control our own brain. Before you ask anybody else a question, you ask yourself the same question in some form or another. Like, imagine you go to buy a car somewhere. You go into the dealer, you see this car. This is a great car, and one of the questions you might ask yourself is, I wonder how much it costs. And then what do? You go look at the sticker on the window of the car. Now that's how much it costs. Then you think, I wonder how much it's going to cost me. And you seek out the salesperson and you ask them a question that leads to the answer of, what's this going to cost me if I want it? So thank you, Debbie. See you soon, I hope. So this central question, if you ask this question, it will light up your brain in a different way than questions that tend to end in for me. And there's no for me at the end of this question. What choice can I make and action can I take in this moment to create the greatest net value? And if you have not heard that question before, write it down, because just asking that question alone will have a profound impact on your life if you ask it in earnest. If you really look for what will create the greatest net value from in any given moment in making choices and actions, that little word net means for all people concerned, both the pros and the cons, both short and long term. You kind of have to be all knowing in order to answer the question perfectly all the time, which is why we don't work with teenagers, because they already do, and spouses are all knowing too, right? But the rest of us, we need to be more conscientious in how we ask ourselves that question, which leads us back to the gaps conversation. You see, when there's a gap between two people, you have one person's perception and we have the other person's perception. And oftentimes we're kind of going head to head when we're in that situation. I think it's a rabbit. No, I think it's a duck. I think we should do A. No, we should do B. You're an idiot. No, you're an idiot. Oh, same perception, just different subject, I guess, the other person. And one of the most powerful things you can do in terms of answering the central question in such situations is literally to acknowledge that we have a gap. I think that's up here. Yes, simply acknowledging that there is a gap. When my partner Harvey and I were writing our book, Answering the Central Question, we came to a point, we were in a particular paragraph, and I wrote out the paragraph that I thought it should be, and he was kind of editing along the way, and I sent it to him, and he came back and said, oh, this isn't right. No, we should say it needs to say blah, 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 blah. I don't remember what it was. And I was like, no, I know I've said what I wanted to say. My message was the message and the meaning is there. And he was like, well, no, that's not right. And I distinctly remember it to this day when I said, Harvey, I think we have a gap in understanding here. What do you mean? I said, well, my understanding is that the message we're trying to deliver in this paragraph is X. And he said, oh, that's not what I thought you were trying to say or what we had intended to say. I didn't know that that was the purpose of this paragraph. So no wonder we were arguing and just going head to head, right? I'm right. No, I'm right. No, you're wrong. Back and forth, which doesn't get us very well. It just doesn't get us very far. So just acknowledging that there is a gap allows us to start to engage in a different kind of conversation where we can start to reconcile some of these gaps. Here we go, where there's gaps within gaps, right? So there's a reason why one person thinks one thing and another person thinks another. And if we can dig underneath to where is the real difference, where is the difference in interpretation of a fact, for example, or the having a fact, if somebody knows something that the other person doesn't, is there a difference between purpose versus attributes? So in the science of axiology, there's something called the definition of good. Something is good to the degree that it has all the attributes required to fulfill its purpose. Write that one down too. Take a screenshot or something. Because this definition of good applies literally to everything in your world. Tangible and intangible. An idea, a rule, a law, a chair, a pen, a computer, a coach, a sign, an argument, we could even say. If it's a good argument, it has all the attributes required to fulfill the purpose of an argument. And things can be pretty complex. There can be lots of moving parts to it. And so there can be lots of different attributes. There can be, we can even have multiple purpi. Is that the plural of purposes? We can have, but they, as long as they're not in conflict with each other, as long as they're compatible, we can then identify what attributes allow both of us to fulfill our compatible purposes. Kind of like accounts receivable versus accounts payable. They seem like they're at odds with each other. One's to bring money in and one is to spend money, but they work for the same organization, and their common purpose is what there is to fulfill. And they both need to work towards that common purpose. But a lot of gaps are caused by an assumption that we're on the same page about the purpose when we're not. Those of you who have ever been in a business meeting where you're sitting there like, wait, what are we talking about? And you get all the way to the end and somebody says, I don't know where we are here because I thought we were supposed to be doing X and everybody else thought we were supposed to be doing Y, and we didn't accomplish anything. This is one of the biggest problems in corporate America, is we're not having explicit and clear, meaningful conversations about the purpose of why we do anything. And purpose isn't just about the outcome, it's also about the value that's going to be created by the outcome. And we spend a lot of time doing stuff that doesn't actually create value, or certainly not the intended value. But if we can identify the purpose, then the focus is on developing the attributes. And this is true for us as human beings as well. We can all choose a purpose. It could be to make dinner, or it could be to go on a vacation, or it could be to cure world hunger. And the only way that we can fulfill that purpose is for us to have all of the attributes required to fulfill that purpose. So that's where the focus is rightly put, on developing the attributes, not just on the outcomes. And if we can have those conversations, we can reconcile a lot of gaps. The simple ones are, what attribute will allow us to fulfill this common purpose? Those are much easier to solve than it is if we are not on the same page in terms of purpose. I think that's one of the fundamental problems we have in politics today, is that we have too many opinions about what the purpose of government is. And therefore, we can't come to agreement on any attributes to speak of. And we could go further down on what's the purpose of being a politician. Is it about serving our country, or is it about power and influence? Too many may be confused about that, right? So these are some simple principles that, if you can adopt the central question and the definition of good and really engage in conversations around those, you're going to find that you're going to be able to approach the gaps, these differences, and close the gap and become far more collaborative, far more cooperative, far more creative and co-creative, and even innovative. And as a result, more productive, less stress, more happiness, more sense of purpose. And with that, I'll leave you with that. So for the moment, and just put it back to you with questions, thoughts, comments, arguments for anybody that has a need to be right. That's all.
Peter, I'm
Hi,
always
Steve.
right. And then
You
I change
missed the
my
first
mind.
half. Hope you like the last 5 minutes.
Haley and Peter, you both spoke at the same time. So Haley,
sorry.
say that again, and then Peter.
Oh, I was just joking and I said, I'm always right, even when I'm wrong, because I change my mind and then I'm right again. So.
That's right. That's correct.
Right.
Miss Beth, since the other guys know how this all works, is there any questions you have first?
No, April, I think this is very consistent with what we've been talking about. It's just reinforcing some of the basic fundamentals of being able to help them to start to be able to apply some of the assets and trying to minimize the biases. So this is just the baseline for what it is that we've been talking about for a while.
But, and Beth, you had mentioned something earlier, and I think it'll set the groundwork to let the guys ask their questions, because they've not been to, Stephen DeSena is just now getting introduced to it. And the other gentleman and Haley are both Haley switched a little bit further, but you've been through the online platform of this learning platform, and you've been doing the work. And you openly said it just takes practice, because the awareness, the journey you've been on. Would you be comfortable sharing how much awareness you've gained through that process?
You gain as much awareness as you're willing to support the time and the effort to actually be cognizant of some of these questions. And it is not even close to being second nature yet. It's a bit clunky, I'll be honest. It doesn't just yet, it will get to be a habit, but at this point in time, it's not like it's readily available as part of my tool set. It still is something that in order to actually start to be aware, you literally have to sit down, kind of take the questions, go through them, the central question, the centering question. The terminology is just taking a little bit of time to start to be able to get familiarized with. But over time, it does become a bit more the way today, Peter, you described things. For me, it was, it's built, it's a build. And it's a
Sure.
build and it's a repetition. You don't get there overnight. It's gonna clearly, I think for everybody, they'll have their own learning curve. Some folks might just pick it up a little bit quicker. Others might just take a little bit more time. But it does come down to whether you're willing to actually literally stop what you're doing, the pattern, adjust, be able to actually put yourself out of the mindset of having your choices be not yours, but those of their thoughts. And instead cognizant and having the self-awareness to be able to slow down, to be able to consider the centering question as you, Peter, outlined it, the choices that you make and the actions that you take to create the greatest net value, then saying, okay, what the hell is the greatest net value? Greatest net value equals taking into consideration. It's like, it does take some time. So hopefully that gives a little bit of context, but it builds upon the way that other exercises are presented, information is presented, and the work that is done will help to create more clarity.
It's a whole process. Peter?
Yeah, you said something there, Beth, intriguing, clunky. And I kind of, in my head, heard a clunk. Meaning, how many times a day do you hear a clunk in your head because something isn't working the way it's supposed to work?
And it's not that something isn't working the way it's supposed to work. It's just working the way it's always worked because that's just the way I've done things.
Sure. Well, when I say something isn't working the way it's supposed to work, we're not producing the outcome that we wanted to produce.
Right.
Right. And it's in those moments that the definition of good tells if I'm not achieving the thing that I'm trying to achieve, it means I'm not bringing the attributes that's necessary to achieve it. That's all it means, right? And in that moment, and it only takes a couple of moments out of the day, really, to make that conscientious choice in those important moments, and to shift out of the realization that if I let my biases run the show, I will not maximize value, period. Once you understand that, in our process, for those that don't know, we measure your thinking across 36 different subdimension ways of thinking, and some of them are brilliant, what we call cognitive assets, and others are what we call cognitive biases. And it's the biases that tend to be both self-centric and that cause you all of the problems that you have in your life, or inabilities to achieve what you want, or whatever's mundane, but they hold you back from living into your full potential. And it's not about fixing the biases. It's only about being able to recognize what your B game looks like. That is, when I'm stressed out, when I hear a clunk in my head because things aren't going, when I'm clunking along and it's stressful, or it's not producing the results that I want to produce. A lot of times the biases are perfectly fine. They help you to get to where you are, but they get in the way of getting where we want to be too often. And if you can identify what those moments are, and we teach you how to do that, then it's just coming out of the absolute recognition that I cannot live my best life as long as I allow my B game, those habits of mind that follow a pattern, run the show. that's when I do want to take control of my choices and my actions as a result, to make a better decision, to think a little bit better and achieve a different outcome. And that just takes a choice, and it takes a little bit of work to get there.
Well,
Yes,
Peter,
Richard.
yeah, 1 second before you answer, Richard. Beth, great awareness. Peter, I think we'll come back to it. And just after you answer Richard's question, is this, Peter, you've been teaching this, I don't know how many years now. How many years you've been teaching this?
Well, depends on how you define this, because it's evolved a little bit, but I've been working with the science of axiology and assessment for almost 20 years now.
And the gift of having it internalized and living it out is like second nature to you. It's like the back of your hand, right?
If only that were true.
Right. Well, and Miss Haley, as you know, owns it almost. I mean, she just like, this is how I think. This is what's supposed to happen. This is natural. This is, and Haley's like having a blast with this, right? And some of us, maybe Beth and I, have a little bit more, and others may have a little bit more response time to how we internalize it. And so when Beth uses the word clunky, I can resonate with her, because I also went through the same journey she's going through of learning how to reframe that perception. And so I'll be curious of how, I just want to support Beth in that conversation, yet also recognize, Peter, what a beautiful statement you said, to be conscientious of, am I asking myself, if I'm going to narrow it down to not just essential questions, but am I fulfilling my purpose? Is this the attributes that I want to use to fulfill my purpose? And I think that was a wonderful question. I wanted to make sure to restate that.
And when we say purpose, we're not talking about your life purpose. I mean, mowing the lawn, if that's what there is to get done, the stuff that we put on our to-do list that didn't get done, or getting a proposal done, or, delivering the proposal and having them accept it. Or, I mean, it could be all things, not burn the popcorn in the microwave, because we got distracted by a shiny object. It could be, all things large and small. If we just decide which ones really matter, and that's where we make sure that we're bringing our A game to the ones that really matter the most. Richard.
Yeah, would you agree, or maybe it's a two-part question? It seems to me that closing the gap always involves some variation of compromise, and that today I find that people are really concreted into their positions more than they have been in the past, and makes that challenging. Do you have any suggestions, assuming you agree with that premise, do you have any suggestions on dealing with that?
Well, yeah. In the science of axiology, there are 3 dimensions we call dimensions of value, known as intrinsic, extrinsic, and systemic. Intrinsic is infinite, extrinsic is comparable, like tangible and doing an action. And the systemic dimension is very dualistic, black and white, all or nothing ways of thinking. And unfortunately, our societies, it seems to becoming, at least if you pay any attention to the various news stations and things like that, we seem to be becoming very black and white about things. And that is where we are when we're at if I go back to this other chart, hold on, that one. This is pure black and white. I'm wrong, I'm right, you're wrong. There's no option there. And the other person believes the exact opposite. And we see that a lot. And you're right, reconciling gaps often requires something akin to compromise. I don't know that it always requires compromise, because back to the story of Harvey and I in writing this paragraph, we didn't compromise. We didn't understand that there were 2 different purposes at work, or that we were trying to fulfill 2 different purposes. And when we took that step back and we looked at, well, which purpose is really the purpose that creates the greatest net value, then there was no compromise. We changed. One of us changed. I honestly don't remember which of us it was that changed at the time, because that's what created the greatest net value. There are times when compromise comes into play, an example of that would be my favorite steak versus her favorite vegetarian restaurant, or my favorite seafood and versus her vegetarian. Okay, the compromise is we won't necessarily go to either favorites. We'll go to a place where we can both get what we want. Is that a compromise, or is that creating the greatest net value? I don't have an answer. You know, it depends on your definition of compromise. Okay. Compromise too often holds the connotation that one person or the people are giving up something that they'd rather not give up, or at least maybe they're willing to give it up now in the spirit of compromise. See you, Beth.
Thank you for
See you
being
again.
here.
So I would dig a little bit further into what actually compromise is about, because I believe if we come from the central question, compromise becomes a non-issue, because it's all about what will create the greatest net value. And sometimes that means letting go of our assumptions of what will create, or what we think will create the greatest net value, long enough to really understand other people's perspectives and gain knowledge or information from other people about what they see. As a lawyer, I'm sure you've been in face of lots and lots of negotiations, and the best negotiations, of course, are, as Stephen Covey called it, win-win. I believe in gain-gain, that there is a solution in which both people end up with more than what they thought they would get, even if they won in the long run. And that's about creating the greatest net value. So let go doesn't mean giving up when it's done in favor of that which will create the greatest net value. For all people concerned, all the pros and cons, both short and long term. Was that one part of the question? You had two parts. I'm not sure I covered both.
That's kind of both the questions. I confess that I'm approaching that from the point of view of law practice. And when I do settlements, the definition of a good settlement is when both parties walk away equally unhappy.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a sad thing that's. So I guess in the legal sense, legal falls squarely in the domain of the systemic, value dimension. And unfortunately, that is where it sometimes ends up. And maybe that is the greatest net value at that time. But if you unwrap it all the way back to why are we in it to begin with, because somebody's suing somebody, and maybe both, weren't thinking about the central question. And that's what led them down the road that landed them where they are. And they both suffered as a result. Unfortunately, that's after the fact, and it's a little hard, but maybe they will learn from it and not get themselves in that situation again in the future.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, and Stephen or Steve, Mr. Rep is a computer technician in a little bit of everything else. In Oregon. We've introduced everybody today, and I know you came on the end of it. So, gentlemen, is there any questions for Peter or myself today before we start to wrap up?
No, thank you.
Awesome.
You're welcome.
No, my head's spinning. I have nothing to.
Really?
I'm going to absorb this.
I appreciate your head spinning. Well, and that's why I wanted to make sure to comment, Peter, and we're actually, Haley and I went over what we're going to be building on moving forward. And next week, we're going to start talking about assets and biases and a little bit more clarity around that. And then the following week, we're going to go into that definition of good and that purpose and attributes conversation. So we can start setting the groundwork, and then we'll go into keep moving from there. So
Well, I appreciate, Peter, your insights and the theory of all this. I always love to see examples. Stephen Covey was great when he gave the example of teaching his son how to maintain the yard. Just the mechanics and details of this, walking through it. I mean, I'm in late, so I don't expect this today, but that's what would be the next step for me is maybe, some actual examples and scenarios and the mechanics of it.
Well, I know April can help you with all of that.
Not for sure.
Sure. You know,
I was
speaking
just
of
gonna-
Stephen Covey, part of being valuegenic is three great quotes here. Well, two great quotes and one okay quote. Um, uh, Seek first to understand, then to be understood. That's a lot about reconciling gaps. It's, when there's a disagreement, take a step back and really understand not just what the other person is saying or what they believe or what their meaning they're getting out of it. But what's underneath that? What is their life experience and their lived experiences and their interpretations of data, for example, and what purpose do they hold in whatever the topic is, so we can have a deeper understanding. I mean, deeper understanding of where that person is coming from. One of the things we also teach in Axiogenics is that anything that you can observe in another person is not a function of who they are, but only where they are and where they've come from. And if we can recognize that, then we can take a step back and say, okay, they are where they are because of their life experiences, and they're not where we are. And maybe I should be where they are, or maybe they can be where I am. Maybe we can come together a little bit better. But as soon as we start to label people as they're this or they're that, and that they're unchangeable, we're stuck in the mud. We're just not getting anywhere. Second quote: people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Boy, is that true. And so asking the question of what on one of the previous slides there that was up there, a great question such as, what are you trying to accomplish? What are you hoping that this action is going to help us achieve or help you achieve? Or that opinion or this rule or this clause in the contract, then we can start to really discuss it. For me, it all boils down to, if I can tell one more little quick story here. When Haley was putting together this PowerPoint, the original version of it had the golden rule, right? Treat others as you would have them treat you, or something like that. And April suggested the platinum rule, which is
Treat others as they want to be treated.
And I looked at both of those and I said, wait a second. Treat others the way I would want them to treat me says, I don't want to hear anything that is different than what I believe, so don't argue with me. Don't teach me, don't train me, don't support me. That's it. Or give me $1 million, because that's, yeah. And then the platinum rule, treat others the way they would want to be treated. Well, who wants to be held accountable when accountability is what will create the greatest net value, right? Not everyone wants to be intrinsically validated. Not everyone wants to go deep and be vulnerable, but sometimes trust requires that in creating it. And so my thought was, well, why not the titanium rule, which is think valuegenically. It is both the titanium. I actually looked up the what was the strongest metal on Earth.
I did too.
Did you? And what was cool is titanium. Tungsten is the hardest, but it's also very fragile and it can break. But titanium is very resilient, and what's the other R word with an S in it? It can bend. It's not fragile.
Resilient.
Resilient, yes, and yet it's also the second hardest on Earth. So this is the titanium rule. It might be the second, one of the hardest things to do, but if we can think valuegenically, meaning the central question, it is the golden rule. It is the platinum rule, all wrapped up in one, because when you're that, you are a growth mindset, you're platinum, you're golden, you are abundance, you are possibility, you are empowering, you are all of that. It's what's at the heart of what it means to be a human being. So we might as well choose it
Excellent.
just a couple
Thank you
times
for
a day.
Thank you for taking the time, Peter. Thank you for everyone else for your participation and your thoughts. And Haley, is there anything you want to summarize this with as we close out for today?
I don't think I have anything else to add. Everyone knows how much I love this stuff. I just soak it up. And it's really fallen in line with the life changes that I chose to make before I discovered Axiogenics. I had kind of discovered the different choices that I were making were bringing me benefit. And I was choosing more valuegenic, a more valuegenic way. And so when I came upon Axiogenics, it just made sense to me because it was, what's that word? Like, it validated my experience, that it's true. And that something that I kind of wanted to mention when Beth was here, so maybe if she listens to this back, when I was going through it in the beginning, I didn't know it was Axiogenics. To me, that it was just my experience, my life experience. It felt very clunky. It felt very uncomfortable. And it stopped feeling that way after I had felt the benefits of restored relationships or, more value in my life. I felt the benefit of my choices, and it made it easier to make like similar decisions in the future. So that's all I had. But thank you again, Peter. Always enjoy.
Very welcome. Very welcome.
We will put this recording in our Q&A on our Facebook group and put it on YouTube in the future. We'll have next week diving deeper into the assets and biases and help people understand the gift of this valuegenic leadership mindset and the opportunity. And by the way, all of you have the links to take this assessment if you haven't already, and we will remind you of them as well. So, and we will keep sharing that because we want to obviously work on the titanium rule and thinking valuegenically all the time. Have an amazing day.
Well, that was
everyone.
clunky.
It was clunky. You know what I mean? It's gonna be clunky for a while. That's okay. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Bye all.
Bye.